The skin was not removed from his back with knives, but with heat. The blood did not flow outward, it boiled inside. When the bronze doors closed and the air around the vessel began to tremble, one of the guards lost consciousness. Through narrow slits in the wall you could hear the man inside screaming as loud as he could, not from his throat but as if from his stomach. It was the Sultan, the rightful ruler, a faithful son of Islam. They boiled him alive so that no one could say he died quickly. 2 months before his execution, Sultan Mehmed ibn Mustafa was still giving audiences, receiving foreign ambassadors, and conducting night prayers. He seemed cheerful, but even in those weeks the court physicians knew that something was wrong with him. Ulcers appeared on his chest and inner thighs. His sweat became sticky and pungent. He had restless sleep, lapses in speech, and an obsession with the same name, that of a preacher from the northern border whose teachings the Sultan had ordered to be transcribed and studied in secret. The first signs of the illness were described in the notes of the court physician Yusuf of Konya. The abdomen is hard to the touch, distended. The stool is black with a putrid odour, morning nausea, finger cramps, elevated skin temperature. The Sultan's body refuses food but demands water at night. His prayers are interrupted by spontaneous muttering. Yusuf applied standard treatment. He drew blood from the shoulder and applied bandages with crushed pomegranate peel and smoking herbs, but to no avail. After a few days, 2 ulcers formed on the Sultan's chest, oozing yellow pus. The servants claimed that his underwear was wet every morning, even if it was cold in the chambers at night. Mehmed stopped leaving his bedroom. Doctors were allowed in only one at a time and for no longer than a quarter of an hour. The rooms were not aired. One of the guards standing at the door later said in exhaustion, "When he breathed, it smelled like a clay oven in which meat had been forgotten." At this stage, the ulama guard intervened. News of the Sultan's condition reached the jurists and muftis. Several influential theologians declared that Mehmed's illness was punishment for his hidden sympathy for the teachings of apostates and for his correspondence with preachers from Kairouan, whom the court had previously found guilty of distorting the essence of divine law. One of them was executed for teaching inner salvation without the mediation of the mosque. This coincidence proved fatal. The Council of Elders met in closed session. 5 of the 8 muftis voted to remove the Sultan and declare him an unrepentant heretic. To avoid open rebellion, it was decided to act quickly and quietly. Doctors were bribed. Access to his bed was restricted. All papers relating to the internal order of the Sultan's chambers were destroyed. The testimony of one of the servants, who was later interrogated with bias, was preserved in the protocol. He asked not to call the imam. He prayed alone, in a whisper, but not according to the canon. He drew something on the sheets, circles in which he wrote his name. One night he burned the Quran, explaining that the truth is greater than the book. This phrase became the official basis for the charge of heresy. When they came for the Sultan, he could no longer stand. Brown foam was coming out of his mouth. His tongue was cracked. The skin on his back was cracked. According to the surviving records, his body had begun to septic. The blood is cloudy. The internal organs are affected. The ulcers are festering. Upon autopsy, there was a smell of sulfur and rotten skin. The disease affected the liver and intestines. 3 days before his death, the deceased lost consciousness but continued to move his lips. But he did not die of illness. Sultan was not killed in his bed. He was carried out at night, on a pall, tightly wrapped in cloth, under the pretext of cleansing the body. There were no witnesses. Officially, he died of fever. In fact, he was taken to a closed part of the old arsenal, where a bronze chamber for melting weapons had been kept since Byzantine times. It was cleaned, the walls were reinforced and hinges were added. It was transformed into a vessel for execution. By order of the Supreme Mufti, everything that happened was considered not an execution but a purification ritual. The document stated, bringing the flesh into accordance with the guilt. Only 2 clergymen, 3 executioners, and a doctor were present. The Sultan was still conscious. He was not beaten. He was not tried in open court. He asked for water. One of the witnesses noted in a private memo, when they laid him on the iron board, he did not resist. He cried quietly. He He said only, "I am not yours." The chamber was heated with coal poured into a recess under the bronze. According to calculations, the temperature inside reached a level at which the body should have died within a quarter of an hour. But the process was prolonged. Through cracks in the stone lining, Mehmed could be heard screaming and gasping for even longer. The vessel oozed steam, and a murky smoke with the smell of honey, blood, and burnt fat came out of the cracks. The smell could be smelled 3 streets away. Several residents later wrote that the next morning there was a foamy film in the wells. When the doors were opened, the doctor refused to enter. According to the archivist's report, the remains of the body were a partially curled mass with charred joints, remnants of fingernails, and a rolled-up skin bag on the back of the head. The flesh had separated from the bones, but the head was intact. The Sultan's face was charred, as if frozen in peace. One of the witnesses whispered, "He's not dead, he knew." The ashes were not buried. They were poured into the sewer under the mosque. There they were, to remain like something unclean. The Sultan's name was removed from documents. His images were burned. The flag hanging in the throne room was taken down without ceremony. The heir was not called son of Mehmed, but simply faithful servant of God. For everyone, it was the end. For the Supreme Council, it was purification. But the Janissary military corps soon learned the truth. One of the executioners let it slip. He disappeared. A week later, there was an uproar in the barracks. Some of the officers refused to take the oath. They demanded an answer. Why had the ruler, even if he was ill, been executed in secret? The muftis suppressed the rebellion, accusing the traitors of imitating bodily heresy. 6 Janissaries were beheaded. The sword used for this was then kept under cover so that it would not happen again. Rumours began to spread among the people. People in the suburbs whispered that the Sultan knew his fate, that his illness was not contagious but prophetic, that he burned the Quran not out of madness but to free himself from the letters. In the villages, people drew a sign, a circle with a dot inside, the same one he had drawn on his bed. They said he boiled himself to leave without a trace. A beggar in the market in Ankara shouted, "He became a spirit in the water." The authorities reacted harshly. More than 80 people were executed for possessing the symbol of the circle. One report from the Mufti states, "The body may burn, but faith in the ashes is worse than coal." After the secret execution of Sultan Mehmed and the suppression of unrest in the barracks, an oppressive silence descended on the capital. There were no prayers, no celebrations, no orders from the new ruler. The Sultan's palace was shrouded in smoke. The servants stopped bringing out the carpets. The ruler's chambers were empty. No one dared to go inside. The bed had not been changed. The windows remained closed even during the day. Those who served in the personal guard left the city without a trace. But fear did not remain within the walls. It began to spread throughout the provinces. It was rumoured that the water in the wells near the arsenal where the Sultan had been burned had become cloudy and smelled of soot. A letter from Edirne said, "An old woman who died of fever had a round mark on her neck, as if from a burn. When she was washed, the skin on her hands came off with the water. Several caravans refused to enter the city. 2 merchants wrote in their letters, 'The air here carries the bitterness of death, and even the dates wither faster.'" The people began to talk about the circle again. They began to draw it with charcoal on doors, engrave it on wooden bowls, and scratch it on brick walls. Rumour attributed the sign not to the Sultan, but to a woman who allegedly came to him in his last days, brought him a decoction, and touched his wounds. No official information about her remains. According to rumours, her name was Shafiga. The court chronicles did not preserve her name. However, a report from the governor of Anatolia mentions a woman in black, calling herself the comforter of the suffering, was seen in the vicinity of the castle. She said she had brought herbs to cure the decay of the soul. The theological commission at the court tried to destroy all traces of her. The symbol of the circle was banned. Its size was specified. If it was smaller than the palm of the hand, the punishment was flogging. If it was larger, the punishment was death. In the villages, wooden bowls were burned if the sign was carved into them. One boy who drew a circle on the wall of a mosque was trampled to death by the guards. Meanwhile, Mehmed's body was never officially declared dead. The ruler's death was not publicly acknowledged. It was forbidden to mourn the Sultan in the markets, and his name was not mentioned in Friday sermons. The Council of Elders presented the new ruler, Suleiman, with a fatwa stating, "He ascends the throne not by blood, but by the will of the people, purified of all evil." This caused confusion, especially in the garrisons. Several officers refused to swear allegiance, demanding the body, a coffin, and burial, but there was no body, and therein lay the main problem. According to the official version, the remains were buried in a closed ceremony, but no coffin was shown, no prayer was said before the people. At the site of the supposed grave is a plot of land covered with a stone slab with no name. No one watched over it. Later, in the notes of a monk from Greece who passed through the city with merchants, it is written, "They fear him even in death." They say that steam rose from the ground. For 2 years, no one set foot there. Meanwhile, the followers of the former Sultan, those who secretly kept his images or teachings, gathered in secluded places. They were not called heretics, for that an official teaching was required. They were simply called those who still remember. It is known that several people were detained in Syria for holding a piece of cloth with a burnt circle on it. One said during interrogation, "If he was boiled, it was for us. We are also boiling, only slowly." The fear of return was deeper than the fear of death. A belief spread among the guards that Mehmed had not died but had gone into the fire to return purified. One of his bodyguards, who had served him for 15 years, shouted before dying of an ulcer, "He will come, and then we will all become circles." In the 4th winter after the Sultan's burning, self-immolations began in the northern provinces. The first were 2 itinerant preachers who publicly set themselves on fire in front of the gates of a mosque in Kayseri. Their last words were, "He cared for us. We will warm ourselves with his heat." Then came the peasants. Then a muezzin who, it was said, had heard a whisper in the mosque, "Rise up in me." The bodies burned for a long time, smouldering and leaving behind ashes in which people found melted copper coins with indistinguishable patterns. Some took this as a sign. In the capital, candles of purification were lit in all districts. Mosques read special surahs against fire that does not come from Allah. The vizier's report to Sultan Suleiman stated more than 100 people admitted that they saw the former ruler in the smoke. One claimed to have heard his breath when the kettle boiled. These words must be burned along with their lips, and so they did. The Inquisition guards began cutting out tongues without trial, without announcement. There were enough signs. Gradually, the very image of power began to change. The throne on which Mehmed sat was burned. The floor on which he was carried into the arsenal was torn up and burned in the desert. His manuscripts, prayer rugs, even his footprints on the marble were covered with lime. One of the old courtiers wrote, "Everything his flesh touched became plague-ridden, only a shadow remained, but even that was dark." Meanwhile, a movement was growing in the remote regions of the empire. People called themselves boiling. They did not recognize the new sultan, did not attend mosques, and did not fast. Their gatherings were accompanied by standing around a fire and whispering phrases from Mehmed's unfinished writings. "The body is a cauldron, the soul is beef." They believed that pain, heat, and decay were a faster path to purification than submission. One such group was arrested in the suburbs of Diyarbakir, 6 men and 1 woman with their bodies covered in ulcers. All of them had ring-shaped burns on their necks. One of them said, until the end, "We are not afraid to burn. He showed us that there is no need to be afraid." Theologians gathered again. This time the topic was not heresy, but a virus. A description appeared in one of the doctor's treatises. "The flame of the former ruler has entered the blood of the people. Those who have heard of him are rotting. Those who believed are burning. The disease is not in the body, but in the name." The council decided to remove the name from all books. All records of Mehmed were destroyed in the state archives. Where the name could not be cut out, it was replaced with "the renegade." In the markets, old men beat children if they said the word circle. The new Sultan no longer mentioned his predecessor. He issued a decree: the flesh is not the truth. It was forbidden to depict, discuss, or attempt to repeat any bodily suffering in prayer. Executions became impersonal, silent, without bodies, without coals. But the people did not forget. In the 5th year after Mehmed's death, inscriptions began to appear on the walls of southern cities. He did not burn. He remains within us. They were scratched out with fingernails, charcoal, soot, and sometimes blood. The inscriptions were short, almost invisible, but repeated word for word. These were not pleas, not curses. They were statements. An invisible brotherhood spread from villages to mosques, from shops to schools, from monasteries to the homes of those close to the throne. One of the arrested boys, who had written signs on the gates of a madrasa in Gaza, was interrogated personally by the city mufti. From the transcript, he did not cry. He smiled. He said that in a nightmare, a man with boiled skin came to him and said, "Now you are my tongue." Sultan Suleiman ordered the arrest not only of those who drew, but also of those who mentioned boiling, circles, and ashes. In mosques, wooden panels were replaced if traces of burns appeared on them. There were cases when books caught fire on the shelves. The spiritual authorities attributed this to the work of apostates. The people saw it as a sign. Everything that had once been associated with the former ruler now caused not shame but alarm. Even those who had executed him began to fall silent. One of the judges disappeared. His body was later found in a ditch. His tongue had been torn out and his palms charred. Meanwhile, the number of spontaneous fires in the homes of the poor increased. No official version confirmed the arson. A report from Basra stated, "A family of 5, all charred. No traces of fuel. In the center of the room is a circle of soot." This gave rise to new rumors. Mehmed was not just a sultan, he was a vessel. He became a flame. Not physical fire, but heat that penetrated the blood through knowledge. He did not die because he was sick, but because he let in something that could not be endured. One of the anonymous preachers captured in Adana said during interrogation, "When you hear his name, you are already burning. When you deny him, he burns even hotter. I feel him under my skin. He purifies us without ashes." The Inquisition intensified its reprisals. A new method of punishment was approved: disappearance in silence. People were taken away at night, without a trace, without a cry. Mosques were locked from the inside at night. A special unit was created to track even the slightest hint of the cycle of fire, as they called everything related to the belief in the boiling. But faith could not be stopped. A fatwa of complete oblivion was signed by all the chief muftis of the empire. It read, "Whoever utters the name will be without a tongue. Whoever seeks the sign will be without eyes. Whoever draws the circle will be burned." But even that did not save them. The words, "He has not forgiven," were carved with a knife on the walls of the Sultan's new residence. The people no longer believed in punishment. They believed in a return. Everything that had been done only made things worse, because once you have boiled a ruler for his faith, every whisper can be his last breath. 6 years after Sultan Mehmed was burned, an event occurred that would later be called the night the sky cracked. At midnight, a glow lit up the capital. Warehouses with fabrics near the southern wall caught fire, the palace smithy caught fire, and even the supreme judge's room caught fire. The fire could not have spread on its own. The sources were far apart, separated by stone and water, but everything burst into flames at the same time. One eyewitness, a palace guard, later said during interrogation, "I saw steam rising from the ground. Not flames, but spirit. It passed through people. In the darkness, someone shouted that he had returned." The Sultan ordered that the palace be immediately cleared of all items belonging to the former dynasty. The rooms were flooded with vinegar and the furniture was taken to the harbour and burned on barges. But fear had already taken root. One of the viziers, close to the ruler's entourage, was found dead in a bathhouse. His skin looked as if it had been scalded, but the water in the bath was cold. Another disappeared, leaving a note on the table. "I feel my bones boiling." The woman in black, who had once been whispered about, had reappeared. Now they said she did not age, that she had no fingernails. that steam came out of her mouth even in the summer heat. She was seen in Cappadocia, then in Aleppo, then in port cities. No one knew who she was, but they believed she carried the remnants of the heat with her. She was the vessel into which it had poured. The church and the council issued their final decree, a ban on any mention of the body. Not the name, not the teachings, just the body. The punishment was immediate, a blow to the throat, without trial, without words, but that no longer stopped them. In the madrasa, they continued to find circles drawn in charcoal. In the bathhouses, they found burnt fingers. On fabrics, there was soot in the shape of a palm. And even in the tomb of the new sultans, there was a smell of steam. One of the coffins was found swollen. When they opened it, it was empty, and a circle drawn on the stone from the inside. They tried to erase Mehmed, but he remained. He became not a teaching, not a body, not a name. He became a process, a word from which wounds flow, a symbol from which the plates smoke, a memory that does not require a monument. The last words written in the notebook of the traveller from Venice were as follows: "I don't know who he was, but they boiled him alive, and now the whole state is one big furnace. And that is the end, or the beginning. Nouveau Sultan, une odeur de vapeur se dégageait. L'un des cercueils a été retrouvé gonflé. Lorsqu'on l'a ouvert, il était vide, et un cercle dessiné sur la pierre à l'intérieur. On a essayé d'effacer Mehmed, mais il est resté. Il n'est plus devenu un enseignement, un corps, un nom. Il est devenu un processus, un mot qui fait couler des blessures, un symbole qui fait fumer les plaques, une mémoire qui n'a pas besoin de monument. » Les derniers mots écrits dans le carnet du voyageur de Venise étaient les suivants. Je ne sais pas qui il était, mais ils l'ont fait bouillir vivant. Et maintenant, tout l'état n'est plus qu'un immense fourneau. Et c'est la fin, ou le commencement.